One of the most well-known knife designs to come out of the 20th century has to be what we refer to as the Kephart knife. Designed by Horace Kephart in the early 1900s, this knife has influenced generations of outdoorsmen and knife designers. Just about every company that designs knives has at least one knife in their lineup that resembles or is at least influenced by the Kephart. And that applies to the knife company Brisa. This is their version of the Kephart. If you're interested in hearing more about it, keep watching. Before we get started, I do want to thank Brisa for sending out their version of the Kephart knife so that I can share it with you. So I've been carrying this knife in rotation with a few other knives for about 5 months. And I've really come to appreciate what the Kephart design is all about. Now, most people won't look at this and think bushcraft, at least initially, but that's what I want to do today. I want to talk about the design. I want to talk about how close it comes to the original, and then I want to do a few demonstrations, basically what we would refer to as bushcraft tasks with it. And then we'll wrap this video up. Now, before we get to doing any demonstrations, I do want to give you a few of the specifications for the Brisa Kephart and talk a little bit about its design. But first, let's just take a quick look at the sheath. This is the sheath the knife arrived in. Very heavy duty leather, simple pancake design, sewn down the sides and has eyelet rivets on all 4 corners, just a fold over loop. I do use this with a drop dangler just to get it a little lower on my belt. Now, what's really cool about this sheath is that when it arrived, it really hadn't taken the form of any knife yet. The knife wasn't inserted. I actually put the knife in for the very first time, and that's what started the forming process. And why that's cool is because you could either set it up for right-hand carry, as I've done here, or I could have returned the knife around and stuck it in for left-hand carry, had I been someone who carries the knife in that way. But of course I am right-handed, so I chose to use the right. Well, let's put the knife back in, right? It's not Kydex, it is leather, but because the knife took the form, or the sheath took the knife for the form as I used it, it's still holding onto the knife very, very tightly. So, well done. And you can see how deeply it carries as well. All right, let's take the sheath out and drop it to the ground here. Now, I am going to go through a few of the specifications for the knife, but of course I'll put all of that in the video description for your reference. So let's just start with the basics on this. I do have my cheat notes here. Overall length from tip to pommel, 8.9 inches. Blade length 4.5 inches. Blade thickness is 0.126 of an inch. I like to say it in metric for this, 3.2 millimeters. Blade height from spine to edge is 0.94 inches. The knife weight is 4.9 ounces, and the steel chosen for this is 80 CRV2, a high carbon steel, which of course means that it will require maintenance because it's non-stainless. Of course, all knives need maintenance, but so much more so carbon steel knives like this. It is a full flat grind. It has a curly birch handle on it, and I'm not sure if they have been stabilized or not. They feel like it. They just feel amazing. They're just so comfortable, so smooth in the hand, yet there's still just enough grip, so it still retains that wood feel to it. Now, this version came with red liners down the inside. Just seems to match well with the wood. I forewent the usual fluorescent color paracord lanyard on the back of it because I just thought it would detract from the knife, and I went with a little piece of red and did a little crown knot just so it would match up with the knife. It's just a beautiful looking knife, and as you can see, brass pins here and here and a brass lanyard tube here. Now, the design. Let's just talk about the design for a minute or so. And the original Kephart knife looked very similar to this, had a lot of similarities in design features, but this is different, and I'll talk about the differences, and the similarities at the same time. So to start with, this is factory made with what they call stock removal. It wasn't hammer forged. The original Kephart knife would have been hammer forged. Now, the blade shape, roughly very much the same. It would have been spear point like this is, with a very nicely center point here. That of course means that it has lots of control for penetration, if that's what you're going to use. Now remember, the Kephart knife wasn't what we think of in terms of a bushcraft knife. It was an all-round knife that an outdoorsman would use. Not so much for wood processing. Kephart had an axe for that. but he would use this for game prep, or game prep, meat prep, food prep of all type, any number of tasks, and yes, of course, some carving as well. But it had to be more of a generalist. Most of the time today, our bushcraft knives, as we refer to them, tend to have a Scandinavian grind because that is often thought of as the very best design for carving wood. This had to be more of a generalist, so full flat grind is the design feature that made it just that much more slicey. But again, I point out that the original was hammer forged, and being hammer forged, it wasn't perfectly flat from spine to edge. In fact, it was a little bit narrowed toward the top, so you might actually say almost like a double convex up and down. So the widest point of the knife, or the blade, was somewhere down close to the middle. Now, it wasn't a dagger by any means, because it wasn't sharpened down the back. It did have a swedge going down the back, but that wasn't sharpened. It was all meant for carving, and it excelled at a number of tasks without being really, really perfect for any one of those. That's the best way to say it. Now, the other thing in looking at this one, from my understanding, not having held either an original, I don't know who has except for maybe just a couple of people on this planet, that the original was also taller. So from spine to edge, it would have been a little wider down through here, and that would have transferred down through the handle. And the handle would have been a little different as well. So the Brisa knife, while it holds a superficial resemblance to the original Kephart, also differs in a number of ways. Now, that doesn't in any way take away from the performance of this knife. I just wanted to point out that it is not a true copy, or it's more of an inspired by kind of a design for this knife. All right, so just the other couple of things to notice here, of course, is the handle. How simple is that? What often referred to as a broomstick handle. It is flat down the sides, with only a slight taper towards the top here, and a slight taper towards the pommel. And that's all there is to this. Now, the edges are chamfered a little bit right across here, which I appreciate because that does lend it well for carving purposes. So I can put my thumb up there, and I don't know if you can see, look at just how comfortable that is to rotate in my hand, meaning that I can use it in any number of positions. I can get way up on the blade if I'm using the tip for whatever. It could be for drilling, it could be for skinning, it could be for gutting a fish, any number of things, and that's still very comfortable and still very safe to do that with. So the handle just lends itself to any number of different grips like that. All right, that's the design pretty much in a nutshell. Let's see how it performs doing what we would normally think of as bushcraft tasks. We're going to start with just a little bit of light batoning with this knife. So I have a piece of maple that is about 14 inches in length. I'm going to say 1.5 inches and 3/4 in diameter, maybe a little larger on that end. There are some kind of gnarly knots in it through here, but I'm going to try to avoid those. This is probably as big as any piece of wood that I would baton through with this knife, only because, well, it's not a big knife. It has some width to it, and yes, ADCR V2 is very tough, but at the same time, there's no sense overstressing the knife by trying to put it through overly large pieces of wood. So this is the one that I will go with today. How am I going to avoid? Actually, why don't we start at the top? That way I know I'm avoiding the knots. Okay. Maybe I'll move it out here. All right, that was easy enough. Okay, a good piece of maple, with the exception that the heartwood seems to be a little punky, but that's okay. We'll cut the heartwood out before we do any carving on it. I'm going to finish these pieces off, try to get a number of pieces out of it that I can use for doing some feather sticks with, and then we'll come back and do that. Kept back one of the splits so that we can make a tent peg out of it. There's the knot that I worked around at the top. What I'm going to do is a little cross batoning with this, just to show that it's, of course, it is capable of it. Now, one of the things I didn't say when I split out the full-size piece is that a full flat grind is usually not your best splitter. Reason being is that it wants the wood depending on the wood of course, wants to grab the side of the blade. So the blade tends to have more resistance going down through. Not that it's not strong enough, it's just that generally speaking, people prefer, myself included, either a saber grind or a Scandi grind for splitting wood. But at the same time, this does the job just, nicely. Just keep it within reason. Maybe that's the thing to say. So we are going to cross baton this so that I can use it, a piece of it, for a tent peg. And, I'm checking the edge, by the way. I'm probably not reporting every time I do. I'm checking the edge, and I've been using this, like I say, for 5 months now, so I haven't experienced any issues with it whatsoever, and I really didn't expect to. I think I'll just roll the stock cut into it this time so that I can carve the notch for the guide line on the tent peg. All right, that went in about 1/3 of the way. And I'll probably do a little bit more. Very rudimentary tent peg, and of course I've often said that the whole point of this demonstration is not to show you how a tent peg is made. Certainly this is not an example of making a good tent peg, but just that a knife like this is versatile for doing different carving tasks, such as notches, an L7 like that. But to make this into a tent peg, we have to put a point on the other end, so let's do that now. To put a point on the end of the stick, I'm going to use the knife in reverse grip and use the chest lever method of putting the point on. And the reason, of course, is to talk about how comfortable it is to use it in this position. All right, let's do that. All right. And one more, or maybe 2 more. There we go. Okay, point on. This knife just really slides through that wood amazingly well, and that is due directly to the fact that it is a full flat grind. I don't think I've shown you this. Can you see how small that secondary grind is on it? It's almost non-existent. The only way I know it's there is when I roll the knife over, it catches the light, and I can see that there is in fact a secondary edge on that. And it's just a joy to use in the reverse grip like this. Absolutely no pressure anywhere in my hand. Just so comfortable to use. All right, let's now move on to doing some feather sticks. All right, I selected another one of the splits off of that larger piece, and I'm looking it over. The grain is plenty straight, but I think I mentioned when I started that the heartwood is kind of old and punky. So I am going to start by working down the center. If I are losing the curls or the curls aren't staying on, then maybe I'll just move to the outside. I just pulled the bark off to make that a little easier. But let's just see what happens. Normally I would just clean any punkwood off before I even get started. And I think that probably got most of it off anyway. All right, let's see how well this curls. So I am getting curls, of course. Yeah, this punkwood is still affecting my curls here. Let's move to the outside and see what happens. All right, I'm getting curls. I'll have a comment on how well this knife does for this purpose in a moment. I'm moving up and down the knife to see if there's any place specifically I like better than any others on the knife. Running the knife forward, running the knife backwards, or different slants, I guess is the way to say it. Okay, now I want you to see there are curls on this, but they're not super consistent. And the reason I think for that is, one, I was suspect with the wood itself, but I'm not going to blame the wood in this case. I guess I could blame the user, but this has been my experience using this knife over the last 5 months. I actually quite like a full flat grind most of the time for most of the tasks. But when it comes to feather sticks, a full flat grind is not always the easiest one to use. Reason being is there's always, well, not always, unless it's got a convex edge on it, there's a secondary bevel, a V grind as it's often referred to, at the very edge. And that can make it a little bit difficult finding what the right angle is for holding the knife against the wood before it starts to bite in. So sometimes it's very shallow. I'm getting little tiny curls, but as soon as I raise the knife up, and that's exaggerated of course, to get some bigger curls, then the knife wants to bite in a long way, very deeply. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, super curly curls are not necessary to make a good feather stick or make something that'll catch a spark and burn as tinder. But what it does is it makes it a little bit more difficult to be consistent in doing that. Now, the other thing that I'm finding is that this is a rather small handle, and that's true of most of Brisa's designs, but I don't know that this is any smaller than any of their others. But being a small handle, especially in an XL hand, you really have to be conscious about not gripping too tight, because the tendency is to grab on and hold on for dear life for control, when in fact you don't need to do that. In fact, you want to actually be loose. It's just that you feel like you need to be holding on. So if you loosen your grip on a small handled knife, it's not my preferred way or style of knife, but if you actually loosen the grip up, you'll actually find that you can do better controlling the curls. Not only better controlling the curls, you don't fatigue your hand. That's all important. Because if you're going to be making a number of these feather sticks, you don't want your hand getting tired and cramped. Now, of course, that handle being so smooth and round, there is absolutely no possibility of getting a hot spot off of any of it. So it's comfortable that way. Just a little small in the hand. All right, let's see if this knife will scrape. All right, just want to make sure I don't have any duff here. I'm not lighting a fire, but I will be creating sparks. All right, that ground is nice and damp. We've had some rain lately, so that's helped quite a bit. So I have a piece of fat wood here. This is the feather stick. I'm not lighting the feather stick, but I am going to try and see if I can't get some fuzz off of the feather stick that I could use if I didn't have fat wood or something else to catch a spark with. Yeah, I'd say that worked pretty good for that. So that would definitely catch a spark. We'll put that to the side. Now, how about scraping fat wood? This is getting a little overused, this piece of fat wood, but let's see. Well, I'm thinking it scrapes fat wood pretty good as well. I've got a little piece of bark here as my collection plate. You can see that. Now, my experience with this knife so far has been, by the way, clean the edge off from the fat wood. Leaves a gummy edge if you don't. My experience has been that it feels fairly sharp, sharper on the other side, the side I don't use, but it hasn't been the greatest for throwing sparks. Now let me just clean an edge off of here. I'm doing that because of the build up on the outside of the ferrous reamer. I'm going to try the pull away method first to see if I can manage that. Apparently I can. Apparently the knife works well enough for igniting fat wood. All right, I think that's enough to wrap this video up. So the Brisa version of the Kephart designed knife, this may not be historically accurate in terms of all the size and maybe some of the design features, but that in no way means that this is not a capable knife, capable of doing all the tasks you would want from a generalized camp knife. It may not be the very best knife for carving wood with, but it's capable. That's what I demonstrated today. But I will tell you, this will do your food prep for you exceptionally well, because that is so slicey. In fact, it is so slicey that it takes some getting used to. That thin grind, and at 3.2 millimeters, it's not a really thick blade either. That secondary is so small, it may as well, for all intents and purposes, could be a zero grind edge on it. You know, it's just a classic design and capable of so many different things. I like the fact that it has that center point. Now, I didn't do any demonstrations today that emphasize just how useful that is, but if you're doing things like drilling wood in a hearth board to create for a fire drill, this is going to excel at doing that. If you need that for penetration and control on an animal to start the processing, then it gives you that. And it just, again, feels so great in the hand. And I just like the simplicity of the design. And I can't get over how good that handle feels in my hand. If I had one complaint, it would be that it's just a little bit small. But that's just me. I have extra large hands, and this just feels a little bit small in my hand. So it may not for you. And, you know, I'm going to continue using it regardless because it just feels so good. I like this for all the general purpose things. Now, what I didn't show you doing as well is the food prep I did at home. That's something I like to do with the knives that I bring out here into the woods, is just carry them around the house and use them for preparing dinner and that type of thing. This does much better than a Scandi for cutting things like meat or vegetables or anything else. It's much slicier and, you know, just much more controllable as well. Okay, that's everything I have to say about the Brisa Kephart. I'd invite you, if you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments section. As I mentioned, I'll put all the specifications for this knife in the video description, as well as the links to where you can go to Brisa's website and take a look at this and all of their other designs. But until next time, get out and explore and take that path less traveled, because it will make all the difference. Bye for now.